Hi there. Welcome to Bible Slash Chat. Gus, hello. How are you?
Thank you for starting
Yes,
right
yes,
on
very
time.
good. Kevin, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you
Good,
doing?
good. We had a question that has come up, and we just want to talk through it a little
Yeah.
bit. One of the things that you notice in the Old Testament that we've, especially as we study Exodus, study other books, is that God seems to move in big swaths in history. So you have Moses and Pharaoh, and you have this face-off. But in actual fact, it's all these people in Israel who were all the people of Israel who were living in Goshen at the time, and then you have really the entire nation of Egypt.
Yeah.
And there's an interaction between these two men that results in massive devastation around Egypt. Or you think about other circumstances like in the book of Daniel, when Daniel, who's a young man, a relatively young man, is taken into captivity, probably orphaned by Nebuchadnezzar. Or the Assyrians who come in and trounce the northern kingdom of Israel. They butcher people at large, and then you have the Assyrians who are then wiped out by the Babylonians. So you have these massive moves in history, and just looking at it, you can think to yourself, well, maybe God is unjust. Joseph Stalin said, "One death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic,"
Mm.
and there's probably something to that, right? You see these huge movements in history, and it's like, well, okay, that's all happening, but think of the individual guy.
Yeah.
Is it just or unjust, and what does that say about God and his interactions? So. We're talking like big questions, huge questions about the sovereignty of God and the goodness of God. So maybe Kevin, you want to start and just give like some thoughts, and
Yeah.
then we can Gus, we'll have you share and kind of bounce it around a
We'll
bit.
see.
Yeah, I think it is helpful to maintain um like a certain lens, like when God says, "I'm going to judge the Amorites," just
Yeah.
like in total, all of them.
Yeah.
It is helpful to see he's treating them as an entire people. So he does have that language. The question I think comes down to like, how do you parse that out with individuals? What if there was a righteous Amorite?
Yeah.
How do you understand that? Because we do see, like you said, righteous people like Daniel getting
Yeah.
caught up when Israel is in the target, in the crosshairs. Israel gets exiled,
Yeah.
but there's righteous people caught up in that.
Yeah.
So I think what's helpful is one to maintain, okay, yeah, the language is saying he's taking out a nation,
Yeah.
like in total. Okay, great. But then if we want to change the lens and say there's individuals there, we have to know that he is exhaustively sovereign. He doesn't just paint with brooms. Like he's specific to all of the individuals in Egypt, in Israel, everybody's story, whether they're elect or not. Everything is either discipline and grace to the elect, or judgment to the non-elect. But there is that individual, exhaustively, intricate sovereignty that's exercised there. So
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to see those two lenses
So like
maintained.
just to start with there, we're saying, so what you're saying is like God is particularly sovereign with every single individual and
Yeah.
every single circumstance that's happening to every person in those nations. So he's moving at global scale, but he's also moving in the minutia of what's happening.
Yeah. So Israel, Assyria, can be treated as one character.
Yeah.
Israel can be treated as one character, and they're going to be, fighting, and Assyria's going to haul off Israel. And that's just a simple way to communicate what's happening, when in reality, there are so many particulars in
Yeah.
that God's sovereign over. But for the sake of language, it does simplify it to say,
Yeah,
like,
that makes sense.
Nebuchadnezzar is going to come
Yeah.
take all you away. Okay,
Yeah.
great. But maintaining that awareness that, yeah, he's particularly sovereign.
Yeah.
Really helpful.
Yeah. It is interesting in the prophets when it talks about Nebuchadnezzar choosing where he's going to go attack, and it says he's at the fork in the road, and he's like consulting the soothsayers, and they do this thing with the arrows, and they slaughter an animal and look at its entrails in order to determine, and it says he's coming to Jerusalem because I'm directing him that way.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So God's totally in control. They're looking at all this other stuff, but
Yeah.
God is actually totally in control of where he's going to attack.
Yeah.
So that like corporate solidarity, or I mean corporate, or I'm sorry,
Yeah.
particular sovereignty over all those things is super important.
Yeah.
Good. Gus, any further thoughts on that?
No, I mean, no, yes. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I think it's hard for us to, in the 21st century, to see, especially when we're talking about big nations,
Yeah.
because we say things like, well, we actually look more at the individual than the whole nation, right?
Mm,
That's basically our whole lives. We're,
yeah.
especially in America, we're super individualistic.
Yeah.
So we don't want to be counted. We want to be independent and everything. But that's not how God has chosen to do things in history.
Yeah.
Yes, as he called people, yes, he called Abraham, he called Noah,
Yeah.
he called, people, but also he's called nations.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's judging nations. How he's judged people? Of course, he has judged people, and he will continue to judge people. But we see, especially in the prophets, these in the Old Testament, we see this a lot, that God is actually judging whole nations. Even Jesus is pronouncing judgment on cities, right? Woe to
Yeah, yeah.
you, Chorazin, right?
Right.
It's not just one person that lives in Chorazin; it's everybody, who is actually being woed to by Jesus. So that's another thing that is important to see. As we see God's sovereignty, yes, it works in the micro level, but it works on the macro level as
Yeah.
well. And you can see this even more, especially when you look at the Old Testament.
Yeah, totally. And so God is, and what you're saying there, God is acting is acting on nations at large,
Exactly.
and he has
yeah.
the freedom to function at that global
Yeah.
level and say and say all of the Amalekites
Yeah.
are evil and will be
Yeah.
put to death,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and he has freedom to make those decisions and
Yeah.
determinations.
And he does, conversely, he also chooses one nation, Israel, to be the sheep of his sheep.
Yeah. Yeah.
They not doing anything good.
Mhm.
You can actually make the case for the opposite.
Yeah.
And yet, because of his love for Abraham, for his love for Isaac and Jacob, he continues that love.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do see that, like in early Exodus, like a bunch of those people could have been horribly sinful, but
Yeah.
as Paul says in Romans, like they're beloved for the sake of the fathers.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you're part of this people that will survive
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a sense. You might be, killed off in the wilderness,
Yeah.
but the entity of Israel will survive.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super helpful actually. So then let's just really quickly let's talk about God's justice. So he's working at macro levels. He says, "I'm going to punish," quote, all of all of the Amorites. Is it just when there's things like genocide or we were talking about it before we started the video, but like just a random Egyptian farmer who's like,
Yeah.
"Oh my word, why are there flies all over the place?
Yeah.
My oldest son just died. Like, what's
Yeah,
happening
yeah.
here? What is there justice there? And then how do we think through that in terms of God's sovereignty?"
Yeah. Well, there is justice there,
Yeah,
right? So we God doesn't do anything unjust.
Okay.
So the question is, how do you make sense of God's justice when you think someone is innocent? And we know no one is innocent.
Okay.
God has been kind enough to let people live and breathe more than 1 minute.
Yeah.
So that's his kindness that they're able to breathe. And also we need to understand this in the corporal idea, right, of the Old Testament,
Mhm.
when you see everyone being judged because of the name that they bear, the Amorites, and you just go down to the Canaanites
Yeah.
and so forth and so on, all the way to the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and then blessed also by one person as well,
Yeah.
which is Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just in case you were wondering.
Yeah. Thank you.
So obviously there's no injustice at all.
Yeah.
Now we tend to again think very in the micro level. We think, well, I don't deserve this.
Right.
Like we get taxed 1 more percent and we get all angry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not a political thing. It's just having a conversation.
Just an illustration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just illustration. Don't kick me under the table, Kevin. But that, I mean, we tend to think that. We tend to feel like that righteous indignation. Oh, how dare they do
Yeah.
that to me? But even this is just to show that how God was so protective of Israel,
Yeah.
that even the guy who is in Thebes by himself, living out there as a farmer, is getting his house full of gnats.
Right.
And he needs to understand that this is God who's done
Yeah.
this
And
wondrous
he has
work.
no idea what's
No,
happening.
he has no
Yeah.
idea.
You know.
There's no news back then, right?
Yeah. So just to summarize what you're saying there, one is that there is no one innocent.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're living in any way is actually a profound mercy of
Yeah.
God. And then when judgment comes, regardless of what the form of that judgment is, I mean, you could have gotten cancer just in the same
Yeah.
way as
Yeah.
you could have been killed by hailstones. So the way in which death comes to him isn't the issue. The fact is that God has authority over that, and it's not unjust for him to do anything
Yeah.
with that person because that person belongs to him. As one point, and then secondly, just that corporate idea of God's punishment of the nation, and he has the
Yeah.
right to do that, and that's just of him
Yeah.
to be
Mhm.
allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Good.
Mhm.
Any further thoughts on that?
No, I think it is helpful, like, to know oftentimes our lens on justice is man to man, and so
Yeah.
it's like, in the Bible does talk about the innocent people,
Yeah.
but it's speaking in a political sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it's helpful
Yeah.
to be like, okay, the Egyptian firstborn kids who are 4 and 8 and whatever, like those guys, politically, they were not aggressors against Israel per
Yeah.
se, and
Yeah.
okay, so they're not like the government shouldn't be coming down on them or things like that. But cosmically, that's a different courtroom to be
Yeah.
in. So
Totally.
Yeah.
it's just helpful to maintain that
Yeah,
difference.
for sure. It's helpful to me too to think about it like that God is massively just in the sense that like if he's or comprehensively just, I guess we could say, if a person is of an age where they're aware of God and they're rejecting him and they're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, like Paul says in Romans 1, then they're going to be punished and they're going to go to hell because
Yeah.
that's God's choice to take their life at the time when he does and send them to hell. That's his freedom to do that. There's no one who's seeking after God. We know that
No.
for a
Yeah.
fact.
Mhm.
And then if they're not of that age and they're not old enough to understand those things, they actually, in the context of them being put to death, they're actually going to go to heaven, which is
Yeah.
an amazing reality. So in both senses, you have God who's really just with the people that he's choosing to use in those ways.
Mm.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Hope that's helpful. If you have questions on this or any other topic, you can always email us at faithbibleoc.org. I'm sorry, info@faithbibleoc.org. Thanks so much.